Dr. Kahn, I am wondering to start our conversation, what's the most frustrating thing you've heard in science and politics on the news? What got you sort of pissed off in the last 10 days that you have a stance against that kind of been in your mind?
We got an hour or two?
Sure, let's do it. Or give
Now,
me
in
one.
the plant-based world, I'd say two things. And I sometimes also go to social media to rant and rave, but only when I feel appropriate. Number one, a article was published, Nutrition Journal, included some very well-known names like a Harvard professor, David Ludwig, MD, reporting that low-carb, high-fat, and that usually means animal food diet, ketogenic diet, in type 1 diabetics, showed dramatic promise. And I don't want to overhype the article, but it was picked up by hundreds of media outlets. New diet for type 1 diabetics. People were saying we shouldn't even consider doing a study of low-carb, high-fat diets for type 1 diabetics from animal-based sources. So it turns out, what pissed me off, it turns out the study was rather unusual. It was published in a journal, but it actually was a users group, a Facebook users group. Of course, there's Facebook users groups for everything. And it was a Facebook users group for type 1 diabetics doing ketogenic diets. Did a survey, and they published the results of the survey, and the survey suggested they had good control. And that made headlines. That, in the hierarchy of science quality, is so low, it's not randomized. There's no control. The authors have bias. There's no subjectivity. There was self-reported data, and on, that what pissed me off is, one, it got, how does the media get that headline everywhere? Two, what would happen if a plant-based doctor went to the Forks Over Knives website, did a poll, how well do you feel on your plant diet? And we got 400 answers, and 90% said this was the Messiah. And we have the Messiah diet, and it's a Facebook survey, and there's no randomized, no control. There's self bias. Right in a minute, and it would never be picked up by the media. So slash and burn, slash and burn, slash and burn. It's just so biased. The second one was that there was a study reported out of Australia about 3 weeks ago, so recent, that the headline was, eggs in diabetics, no harm. Eggs in diabetics, healthy. Eggs in diabetics, same. It was a study, but the headlines were in hundreds of media outlets. So let's go to the study. The study was 12 weeks, 120 diabetics, type 2, less than 2 eggs a week versus 12. Now, this was a real study, randomized. It wasn't blinded. You knew if you were eating eggs or not. What didn't they say in the headlines? They didn't say that it was funded by the Australian Egg Board. They didn't say that several of the researchers were funded by the Australian Egg Board. Doesn't mean they're biased, but let's talk about it. They didn't say that the study design was, if you're eating the low egg group, you should increase your meat and dairy consumption. So you had animal-based diets, one mainly eggs, one eggs, cheese, and meat. And it didn't have any difference at the end of 12 weeks on blood tests and such. But that's never what's going to be seen. Now, what really, really ticked me off, and then I'm done, is the same week, a Korean research unit published a peer-reviewed journal, 9,000 patients followed for 7 years, 4 eggs a week in diabetics tripled the risk of heart disease. That's been shown before. So yes, that's an association study, but they've got 9,200 people, 7 years, data points, no funding bias, no funding conflict. And that kind of stuff, those two examples, is the bias of the media, maybe the bias of some of the researchers based on funding and their perspective. And of course I have a bias, but I have said this and I'll repeat it. Show me a study of good quality that we take heart patients, we feed them eggs, cheese, and meat, and we've reversed their heart disease, so the #1 killer in America and the Western world goes down. I'll talk to my patients about that. But I'm waiting, and I think I'll wait till I'm a skeleton till we see that data.
Okay, yeah, and it makes so much sense that bias in studies is so frustrating, because you have good studies that are done, and then you have faulty studies, but people reading them just see it as, oh, this is a credible study. But there's clearly smart people, like, your good friend who you've debated many times, Dave Asprey, and these podcasts we listen to, and all this information about where people do point to studies.
We're cool. Yeah,
what?
I agree. No, we're good. We're good. We're so good. We're tight.
I'm just wondering, where are the actual studies, and are there good studies done that do show that eating a higher fat or ketogenic diet can have some of these claims? Like, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here and say, is literally every single of these really intelligent, smart podcasters and doctors that promote this different diet, are we really talking here about a difference of opinion when we're looking at valid medical research? Or are you really trying to say that when you pin together a plant-based diet in terms of the good studies and research done, that there is a significant amount more of credible data to prove that versus the other? Or are we in a situation in the world where there's so many studies that can prove every different possibility that you could want to prove, and that we really can't get to the bottom of who's right and wrong? What's your opinion on that?
That's a good question, and it's the frustrating part. Nutrition science is challenging because it's not like smoking. We know you never should smoke. It's easy to say never smoke. Food's tough. And, number one, so people, you can't do a trial of smokers, non-smokers that's equivalent in food. We can't starve people, and that's one. Number two, even if you come up with a reasonable study design like this egg study, you still got to get people to comply. You get these bizarre twists, like if you're on a low egg, you're on a high meat and dairy arm. Bizarre twists because they want to keep the calories similar. You lose a lot of people during follow-up because and there have been Dr. Dean Ornish, who revolutionized nutrition science when he showed that a plant diet with lifestyle measures reverse heart disease. His first trial, he locked people in a hotel for 28 days voluntarily, but obviously all their food was provided for them. And there's something called a metabolic ward study. You're in the hospital, all your food's provided to you. You have control of the situation. You give people a diet and you follow up in 12 weeks, and they've got vending machines and food trucks and pantries, self-reporting and food frequency questionnaires. There's just a lot of bias introduced. So to answer your question specifically, despite it being difficult science, there isn't enough, and what exists in what we call the ketogenic diet world, which is usually animal-based foods, a lot of meat, could be eggs, could add coconut oil, which is obviously a tropical plant oil, butter and such. There's 7 studies that I put together in a blog called The Skeleton in the Ketogenic Diet Closet that was published December 1, 2017, if anybody wants to look for it. 7 studies have said, and these are medical studies of large size, up to 250,000 people, following people long term, that if you follow a low carb, high fat diet that induces ketogenic physiology long term, there's a side effect called your risk of dying goes up. DYING, your risk of dying goes up. That's in the scientific literature. So you would think that anybody that has a new plan for a ketogenic diet or new data needs to address the fact, although previous reports have demonstrated an increased risk of dying with diets of this type, our data is promising, but we're going to do lots more studies before we ever tell anybody to do it, because we don't want to kill people or have them be at increased risk of dying. Nobody says that. That's the skeleton in the closet. How much good data? Well, the ketogenic diet data is almost all in epilepsy. If you have seizures, and your phenobarbital doesn't control it, or your caprylisol, there's been 100 years of science that a low-carb, high-fat diet creating ketone bodies may control your seizures. No doubt about it. That's a very small group of people. No doubt about it. It's not true for Alzheimer's. It's seizures. Everything else, who knows? Now, there's a hot new company out now on the web called Virta Health, V-I-R-T-A Health, that says they can help type 2 diabetics reverse their disease, low-carb, high-fat, ketogenic diet. And you pay thousands of dollars, and you get a coach, and you get a program, and you get supervision to do it successfully. They're reporting some wonderful case examples. They've published a 6 and 12-month paper. There's no control, there's no blinding, and all the authors are financially invested in the company. If it was a plant-based study, it would be sliced and diced in a heartbeat. That Dr. Kahn, Dr. Ornish, Dr. McDougall, Dr. whoever, own. Dr. McDougall has a dried soup line. I own a restaurant. Dr. Ornish eats only plants. We're all a bunch of biased vegan militants. So the science world is very tilted. But in reality, right now, I'd say the ketogenic diet world using animal products is a recreation of the Atkins diet. It's one way to lose weight. There's other ways to lose weight, and we know they're not all good. Chemotherapy, Zika virus, HIV, have emesis during pregnancy, a lot of ways to lose weight. You got to ask the question, is there weight loss that's consistent with healthy and sustained outcomes and all? And we really are without that data for ketogenic diets.
Sure.
I'll finish up. One of the bright lights recently on the nutrition world is Dr. Walter Longo, close to where you are right now in Los Angeles, University of Southern California. And he's a leading scientist in nutrition. There's no label. He's not vegan, he's not paleo, he's not keto. He talks about there has to be 5 pillars of science in nutrition. What do we know about the biochemistry? What happens when you eat meat to the biochemistry of your aging process? The answer is it hastens, it quickens the aging process. What do old people eat? What do they eat in the blue zones? Are they doing ketogenic diets in the blue zones to make it to 100? The answer is they're not. What does the biochemistry say in cells? The biochemistry says reduce your animal protein, reduce your animal fats. Dr. Colin Campbell showed that. Dr. Longo showed that. What do most of the literature show, whether they're association, randomized studies? They say stay away from animal products. And finally, what does it all fit into the environment? How does it fit into animal rights? 5 pillars. The ketogenic diet world, sorry, I just kicked my laptop, is maybe half a pillar at best. And Dr. Longo in his book, The Longevity Diet, flushes it away in one paragraph, saying, why are we discussing this? There's so little scientific basis to talk about it anymore. Pretty amazing how we just threw it away.
Yeah, so when you said the word meat, it reminded me to mention, because I do my due diligence and I like to listen to a lot of podcasts and videos that have opposing views and opposing views to what I believe and what I've researched. We're in alignment in terms of our nutritional. I don't want to say it's a philosophy because you're a scientist and a doctor. This is just this is how you were led using the scientific method to this outcome. But one thing I hear all the time as a criticism to vegan doctors and people speaking about it like us is that we're too reductionist just saying that meat is meat, that a hunted deer is a completely different product than a free-range cow, than a factory-farmed chicken, and that maybe all these vegans are misled because they're assuming that, sure, the CDC says that processed meat is a carcinogen. Most people will agree, even in the keto and animal eating world, that factory farmed animals with antibiotics and all this stuff is not healthy, but that's a completely different product and we shouldn't paint meat with this one broad stroke. And that if you go out and hunt wild deer, which of course is not accessible to probably 99 or more % of humans living in the modern world who do have the actual option at the grocery store to eat the factory farm meat or the sweet potatoes and beans and veggies. But let's just assume in a perfect situation that you did have the ability to source those animals differently. What is the difference to you, or have you researched the difference nutritionally and what it will do to your athletic performance, longevity, just analyzing these two products, the difference amongst meat? And what do you see that is similar in terms of the effects on the human body?
Well, just to answer your last part, there's only so much data, but in the last 2-3 weeks, there was a study about low-carb, high-fat diet to induce ketogenesis and athletic performance, and it did show, real science, athletic performance went down. So I don't know what these people think they're gaining. And even if you step back, we have a mechanism in our body that when our calories are reduced and they're shifted towards lower carb, it was a bad year, there's no grains to harvest. We have a system to switch from glucose to ketone as a fuel. And We know in epilepsy it can be a benefit. We know very little other situations where it's proven to be a benefit. But there never was a natural situation where people were in it all the time. You were starved, and then you found something to eat. You were starved, you found something to eat. People are doing this 365 days a year, year after year, and it's a completely untested program that these 7 studies say actually favor early death. So beware, beware.
Well, look,
now.
Most people aren't on a ketogenic
There is
diet.
actually a vegan version, a plant version.
Sorry, we have a little delay, but I was just going to say, what about people who are eating a diverse diet, maybe aren't in ketosis, but getting back to the question of sourcing, animal products, is there a difference?
So the numbers are approximately 98% of the meat eaten in the United States comes from factory farmed. And you could say it's elitist to talk about grass-fed beef. There is no plan to expand that to reach 40, 50, 80% of the Western world. I mean, talk about the size of the pasture land you're going to need to have all grass-fed beef, the impact on the environment and just our lives. If anything, it'll move to factory-made meat before it's going to move to.
I know. I'm just wondering the science
the amount of
difference in a perfect world.
So, there's a few reports that there's more omega-3 in grass-fed meat. Honestly, you're going to be able to do it in a factory. You're going to be able to switch on omega-3 as high as you want. That's the future. If you're going to eat animal meat, it's not going to be grass-fed. It's only a few years away. But there are things in meat that are always in meat. There's things in meat that are never in meat. There's never fiber in meat. There's no fiber in grass-fed meat. There's no fiber in grain-fed meat. There's very little vitamin C, magnesium, and such that there's no phytonutrients, the plant nutrients.
Right, but what if someone is eating animals and tons of plants at the same time?
You'll never find it. What's in meat that you can't take out? Carnitine, an amino acid. Chili con carne. Carne is meat. Carnitine, if your microbiome, your bacteria are right, will produce a chemical called TMAO that's very bad for your arteries. Meat has a chemical called 5-NU-GC that may promote cancer cell growth. Meat has an amino acid. There's amino acid proteins in plants. There's amino acid proteins in animals. There's way more of leucine and methionine in animal protein meats than there are in plant protein beans. And they favor actually cell growth, cancer, aging in the meat production. So I don't care if your cow's eating grass or your cow's eating grains. Some of the physiology, it's still a cow that's made of meat muscle that doesn't change. Now the fat content, the omega-3 content may change, but that's not enough to overcome the environmental, the cruelty, and the health issues that are inherently in meat. And free-range chickens and free-range eggs. You can't take the choline out of eggs. It triggers the same response. And, most eaten food in the world, which clearly it's not. And, free-range, I honor any farmer that's kind to animals, as opposed to the cruelty that occurs in these large factories run by Cargill and others, Tyson and Purdue. But they're still, at the end of the day, animal didn't vote for that life plan, and the health consequences are still causing great suffering in the Western world.
Yeah, the old traditional food pyramid, the one that from 20, 30 years ago with all these carbohydrates and grains, cereal grains on the bottom, this has been one of the points that people, again, in the pro-animal eating world, in terms of nutrition, will say, hey, look, Americans are sick as hell, we're obese, we have heart disease, the state of the country, which we would all agree with, we're so unhealthy in all of these diseases of affluence, it's around food, and these people will say it's because America's been on a low-fat diet for the last 50 years. Look at the food pyramid, all grains on the bottom. So I want to ask you, let's evaluate, how do you think America has been doing on their so-called low-fat diet over the last 50 years? Have we been on a low-fat diet?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it comes up a lot. anybody wonders what I'm doing, I'm in the basement of my restaurant and think. I'm a cardiologist that owns a couple of restaurants.
That's awesome.
So,
you're a man of many hats. I am as well. I
Indeed,
respect that.
indeed, the whole story is distorted because in reality, you can go back to many great scientists, but you can go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the research of a very famous scientist, Dr. Ansel Keys from Minneapolis, ultimately spent half of his life in Italy, described the Mediterranean diet in 3 popular books to the United States that introduced us to this very popular and healthy eating plan. He never advocated for a low-fat diet. His cookbooks, which are very popular, are hardly low-fat. What he did identify in large studies with many other co-authors was animal saturated fat correlated with the development of heart disease and other illnesses more than any other food nutrient. Sugar was there, but it was considerably less. And he advocated for a shift from animal saturated fat to healthier diets that limit red meat. So, for example, what does the Mediterranean diet say to do? Limit red meat, up your legumes, your fruits, your vegetables, your 100% whole grains, and enjoy some olive oil and red wine. That's the Mediterranean diet. So, truly, the scientists identified there are versions of medium fat diets using plants that are associated with long-term health in many parts of the world. It's true, the American Heart Association took that and started advising the public 40 years ago, keep your saturated fat level low. Certainly keep your trans fat, this artificial, largely artificial fat, low. Substitute vegetable oils for animal fats like butter and lard. And in reality, as you pointed out, when you look at USDA data, we eat way more calories every day than we did. We eat way more sugar calories than we did. We eat way more fat calories than we did. We eat way more animal foods and cheese and chicken than we ever did. Has America tried the low-fat experiment and failed? No. No, they haven't. They've tried the abundance, overeating, processed food experiment, and it's failed miserably. But it never was. Even some of the scientific studies. There's a very famous study that was published in 2013-14 called PREDIMED, Mediterranean Diet Study out of Spain. The low-fat diet group was about 36% of calories from fat. Well, that's not what the Okinawans ate.
Yeah, that's not a low-fat diet.
That's not what Dr. Ornish, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Bernard Wright. So, I mean, it's easy to slap a label that this was a low-fat diet, and it's 2 to 3 times higher than some natural communities benefit from. And there are healthy versions of plant-based medium-fat diets. There are healthy versions of plant-based lower-fat diets, depending on the number of nuts, avocados, your use of olive oil or not. But just stay away from animal foods that are high in animal protein, animal fats. Repeatedly, they've been shown to be associated with disease and shortened lifespan.
It's not too often that I have an incredible vegan doctor just able to talk to, so I'm going to indulge you and ask some personal questions now about my lifestyle. So I've gone in and out. I've been vegan 6 years now. I've been obsessed with researching. I eat a low-fat, whole-food vegan diet. I've gone through periods of time eating junkier vegan foods, raw vegan for 9 months, but pretty much the most consistent for many years is just a very simple rice, bean, bread, pasta, potato, fruit, little nuts and seed vegan diet. But on my lifestyle on the bicycle, there are often times when I need the energy for that extra push, and while I definitely do not add refined sugars into my daily random food when I'm just having a normal day, I will absolutely, if I'm at a truck stop or something, knowing that this isn't the most healthy choice, but I will throw some sugar in a water bottle, refined sugar. Keep in mind that I'm eating maybe 3,000 to 4,000 other calories of high fiber sweet potatoes, oatmeal, bananas. My nutrient requirements definitely making it. My fiber requirements out of the roof because I eat so much food and I eat all these high fiber foods. So let's assume that my diet is dialed in. But you think that over the course of my 3,000 to 4,000 calories in a day, I sprinkle maybe, let's say, a cup's worth of refined sugar in a water bottle. Is that something that I should not be doing?
I'm just having visitors.
No, that's great. I
That's
love to
okay.
keep
It's
it
real life.
authentic. I want this interview of Joel in a real way. I'm not interested in yeah. So should I stop adding that refined sugar? Is it okay to eat that amount of refined sugar, supposing that I'm getting everything else? Let's talk about refined sugar for a bit.
Yeah. So you're embarking on a level of fitness that few of us do in terms of daily biking routine. Um, I would refer you, and I'm sure you're familiar with. I love Brendan Brazier's book Thrive, and Scott Jurek, and how did he march the Appalachian Trail and set a world record. Finding Ultra by Rich Roll, and
he was definitely eating a lot of. Scott Jurek was definitely eating a lot of refined sugars during that.
Right. So, can any doctor point to refined sugar and say it's a health food? So, I mean, even if you step back, you're on an island, you're starving. Food doesn't become an issue of quality; it becomes an issue of survival. In some sense, I mean, quality matters in what you're doing, but you're not speaking to the average American who sits for hours and hours and maybe exercises half an hour, maybe not at all, and who already is eating more calories than they need and usually processed food. In the hierarchy of developing heart disease, studies going back in time say animal foods rich in animal protein and particularly animal saturated fat, chicken, cheese, eggs, butter, are associated with heart disease more than added sugar. But interestingly, in these studies by Dr. Ansel Keys, the single food that was the worst in predicting heart disease was actually pastries. What do pastries have? They have refined white flour, they have refined white sugar, they have a lot of added fats, could be lard, that could be butter, and they bring in the perfect bomb for your health long term. An athlete's going to likely tolerate a croissant or a pastry better than a sedentary person. But we do teach what I think is real. You can't out-exercise a bad diet for decades and decades. Jim Fixx, the book of running, taught us that by being very fit and tragically dying at age 52 or 53 of advanced heart disease. You should try and out-exercise a bad diet, but you should really change your diet to make it better, and then you have the best of both worlds. You need a calorie source. I mean, you could do date bars, you could do you could have some Lara bars in your pack and all that, but I don't think for your needs putting some raw sugar in your water bottle to sustain your blood sugar while you're exercising is doing yourself any harm.
Thank you. I was really excited to ask you about that because it's just so intuitive to me that sugar is not a health food, but then I really try to, again, play the devil's advocate and think about it. And again, tell me if I'm totally delusional here. I'm just curious about my situation. I think this is fun to talk about. I almost think of it when I'm eating refined sugar like if sugar came from a plant, we took all the fiber and water out of it and nutrients, which is why refined sugar is not a health food, because it's just a source of energy without anything else that foods usually have packaged with it, like water and fiber and all these nutrients. But if I'm already getting all of that other stuff and eating a bit of sugar, it's almost like all my foods are just a little bit naturally sweeter. Is that true, or is there something inherently about refined sugar that is going to increase my risk of cancer, again, with the amount that I'm eating with my lifestyle?
To be scientific, and I mentioned already a Dr. Walter Longo, University of Southern California, those 5 pillars of longevity. He described a pathway in our cells, first in the world to really parse this out, called the PKA pathway, protein kinase A pathway, that is triggered by sugar activating receptors in a cell. So if your added sugar is raising your blood sugar level, which yours might not be because you're metabolizing, taking it up, you're insulin sensitive. You're eating sugar, but your insulin is leaving your pancreas. It's attaching to receptors on your muscles and your liver cells. Your glucose is quickly going into the cells, so your blood sugar is okay. So you may be fine. For a lot of us that are as active as you are, raising our blood sugar consistently opens up this pathway called protein kinase A that tends to trickle down and can lead to increased risk of premature aging, premature chronic diseases. It's part of the reason, not the only reason, that pre-diabetes and diabetes with chronically elevated sugars promotes, both diabetes and other chronic diseases like cancer, like cardiovascular disease, neuropathy, dementia. So, what's good for you isn't good for the gander necessarily, for the sedentary person, but for you, it's fine.
I'm sure you know about people like my good friend Robbie, who's a type 1 diabetic on a completely, fruitarian diet. So, but like, what's the difference between refined sugar can be okay not refined sugar, but sugar, simple sugars, not complex cooked starchy carbohydrates for diabetics can be okay, but you said that refined sugar, supposing that everything else is low fat, would not be good for diabetics. What's the difference?
Yeah, there's a statement, and I think it's relatively true, that sugar has the poison, fruit has the poison and the antidote together. What's the poison? That its sugar content is higher than a piece of kale. What's the antidote? The water and the fiber. So that when you eat a whole, as opposed to drinking apple juice, as you're eating an apple, you're eating something that's probably 80% water, so it's already diluted, a little bit like your water bottle. And number two, the fiber changes the rate of release of the sugar into your bloodstream. And by creating bulk in your GI tract, slows down the rate. So you may not get a spike of blood sugar to 180. You might get a gradual rise to 120 and then it falls. Same in every fruit out there, that the fiber content. Fruit itself has a variety of sugar contents, with the dark berries being lower glycemic, and papaya, mango. But you're right, Robbie Barbero and Cyrus at Mastering Diabetes have achieved excellent diabetic control eating a very heavy whole fruit diet. But they worked hard to create what's called insulin sensitivity in their liver and muscles by lowering the fat content so low that they've, at least theoretically, cleared fat droplets out of their liver and muscles, and their liver and muscles are now very sensitive to insulin they inject. So yeah, I think you're doing it fine. I mean, if it was practical to eat a peach while you're riding, or reach back and grab a banana, or
I do that a lot. I'm in Mexico. Oh yeah.
Smash dates like Brendan Brazier talked about.
Oh yeah.
Then you're getting sugar plus fiber plus some.
I was doing a lot of the refined sugar up in Alaska and Canada. Now here in Mexico, I'm eating only raw foods pretty much until dinner because I have unlimited cheap, ripe mangoes, papayas, citrus, bananas. It's amazing. How long have you been a cardiologist?
30 years, 31.
Okay, so I'm guessing you've met a few other cardiologists in your time. What percentage of cardiologists, again, not in the plant-based world, just as a broad spectrum of your peers in the medical field, what percent of doctors do you think know about the powerful medicine of a plant-based diet in order to reverse and prevent this disease? I'm not saying what percent of them promote it to their patients. What percent do you think know the power and information of what you and I know?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's never been done. There has been a recent survey of how much nutrition the cardiology trainees
I'm just wondering, anecdotally, in your experience of
I would say if you actually created a quiz, what is the famous book John McDougall wrote? What's the movie that has Caldwell Esselstyn and Colin Campbell that went viral? What year did Dr. Ornish publish a randomized study of, in such a quiz? The score would be 20% positive answer. I think it'd be very low, very low. Would 50% of cardiologists out today recognize the name Caldwell Esselstyn? That would be the max possible. Would 50% recognize Dean Ornish? Probably, but probably older cardiologists, not younger cardiologists. So we've got a huge deficit because, why is that? I mean, the number of research studies on plant-based cardiology is dwarfed by pharma and surgery and stents. Two, there are no drug reps that come talk about whole food plant-based new products. Did you hear the news that there's a new national brand of green juices that have turmeric in them and stabilize? No, I mean there's nobody educating physicians on that. They're being wined and dined like I was at steakhouses and hospital events that have ice cream and cake. So there's so little clarity that we're a health movement, and while we may not have every answer, our obligation is to pick basic messages. There's an organization called TrueHealthInitiative.org that is over 400 experts around the world in nutrition. And although they're very diverse, plant-based, paleo, keto, Mediterranean, fruitarians, whatever, they agree to 4 principles. Eat real foods, not processed, close to nature, meaning unprocessed, locally sourced, so we're not talking about, trying to get broccoli from 2,000 miles away, try and stay local, and drinking water, tea, and coffee. So we're getting away from sugar-sweetened beverages. Everybody agrees we need to stand up. Every nutrition expert in the United States needs to hold hands singing a Michael Jackson song. We are the unprocessed. We drink no soda, because we need to create absolute unity for the public. They all agree on 4 principles. And okay, maybe some of them eat fish and some don't, but I'm impressed by the unity.
Why? I'm really into talking about political corruption, and I'm not a doctor, so I can only trust the videos I watch and things like that. But let's really get in and talk about the whining and dining, as you said, of the legalized bribery, as far as I'm concerned, and corruption in, of course, we know the world of politics, but in the world of medical science. I mean, we're so used to the idea of corruption in America and pretty much every single other country where people are making money. But if you really think about it, I mean, it's a devastating disaster that there is legalized bribery of companies whose only interests are to maximize profit, that are literally, again, I call it a legalized bribe. You can call it whining and dining, taking someone on a vacation to a restaurant. That is corruption bribery 101 in order for a doctor to push a product onto a patient, not based on what's the best solution, but what is going to be most financially beneficial for this company. So tell me, what actually happened? How have you been approached when you were an early doctor, maybe before you went plant-based? What is it really like out there for doctors?
It's not perfect, but it's better than it used to be, but it's not perfect. And indeed, there were trips and there were plays and there were major whining and dining and it still exists more with surgical product providers, orthopedic surgeons, neurosurgeons, big expensive equipments, heart valves. Pharmaceutical has been reined in, and yes, so they'll have a dinner program, and it's only going to be about a new drug, a new procedure, a new operation, a new product for a new operation. It usually will be at a steakhouse, so the medical message is already somewhat distorted. Of course, I actually find steakhouses easy because they got about the best broccoli and the best asparagus, the best baked potato anywhere, but you got to obviously be willing to order that way. And there is some requirement to stick to FDA-approved presentations, but you're never required to say this drug for diabetes has to be kept in perspective of the data for lifestyle, the data for exercise, the data for diet, the data for fasting mimicking diets, whatever it is. I mean, there is no requirement to give a broad picture, and it never happens. So, yeah, it's pretty distorted, and it's obviously not for patients' real informed consent. That's what suffers, informed consent. People that are facing bypass surgery, people that are facing stent therapy and such, are told maybe 5% of the time. Do you know that I feel obligated to tell you, even though I think you need surgery, you might want to check this website tonight before surgery tomorrow. You might want to watch this video. Now, there's a stunning example of good. Montefiore Medical Center is a gigantic organization in the Bronx in New York. And my friend and plant cardiologist, Dr. Robert Osfeld, has got it that every TV in every room, in every emergency room, plays Forks Over Knives on a continual loop. Now, somebody has to tell the patient, hey, you got a stent scheduled tomorrow morning. You probably should watch Channel 40 tonight before you go to bed. And I would be surprised if there aren't some that say, whoa, I had no idea that there's patients being interviewed there that were able to deal with this. Let me deal with it. It, in some sense, hurts the bottom line, but it's ethical, it's informed, and it's necessary. One of the other nice revolutions occurring, there are plant-based cardiologists and physicians and nurses and all. We're not the most organized vocal. Rush University in Chicago, the chief of cardiology is a friend of mine, formerly in Detroit. His name is Dr. Kim Williams, and he served as the president of the American College of Cardiology. And he now has, based on his personal experience, his patient care experience, he has 9 or 10 cardiologists in a large academic hospital that are all plant-based. That's got to be the world's record. There is this rumor that their business is actually down a bit, because if half the cardiologists will tell a patient in the clinic, if you don't read Dr. Esselstyn's book, Dr. Kahn's books, Dr. Ornish's plan, you're facing, a stent or a bypass or a heart attack. Some of them actually are convicted and do it, particularly when the doctor says, that's what I do. What's more powerful than a doctor saying, I dealt with my own health issues, or I prevented health issues, because I've been doing this for 40 years, so knock on wood, I don't have health issues. Anyway, so there are bright spots, but it is an ugly, sordid affair, and it's always followed the money. Just real quick, I'm on staff. I'm a professor at a medical school in Detroit. Walk into the University Hospital. First thing you see in front of you is the sign to Wendy's Burgers in the lobby of the hospital. And if the Wendy's Burgers don't please you at Harper University Hospital, just walk down the hall. You can eat at Chick-fil-A. You can kill yourself 2 ways in the lobby of a university hospital. The medical school is awesome. The hospital has its bottom line up, their bottom rear totally distorted. And my other hospital, called Beaumont Hospital in suburban Detroit, world famous, they had to catch up to the university hospital. So they're putting a hamburger chain called Wahlburgers attached to the hospital, which is basically a glorified fast food chain with a Hollywood star, Mark Wahlberg, attached to it. So we're so conflicted, and it's always, always, always money, money, money. And I understand reimbursements down and all, but, open a clothing store, put in a gym, put in a child care center, don't put in a burger joint.
Is this a unique problem to the American medical system? Have you seen other hospitals and medical facilities in maybe a bit kind of more socialized medicine countries that have much less of this blatant corruption, or is it really the same when it comes to
there are different rules around the world for access of representatives. It's less than it used to be, but it's still pretty darn pervasive. If nothing more than the lunch at the cardiology conference for the trainees is brought in by a drug rep that leaves brochures. He doesn't get to talk to them anymore. It's usually an unhealthy lunch. Right. The whole system is terribly mixed up. There's no messaging that's really of health, and there is this conflict. I don't know how it is around the world. I think, I know United States, I think, is one of only 2 countries where you can advertise direct to consumer with prescription drugs, and you see that all the time. I don't know if that helps them or hurts them. It must help them because they keep doing it. But all I know, when I see 85 different ways to die if I take this drug, it doesn't make me run. And these are usually unbelievably specialized drugs for very rare diseases. So I don't even get, we're not talking about a drug for the common cold or constipation. Those are usually generic and not expensive enough to be worthy of advertising. So it's sorted. But, I see bright spots. There's the American Medical Association has called for healthier hospitals in a plan. A lot of that was the work of Dr. Kim Williams and others. The American Hospital Association, certain hospitals like Lee Memorial in Fort Myers, Florida, St. Joseph Mercy Hospital in Ann Arbor. There's some great examples of hospitals bringing in training programs and plant options, healthy education, but a long way to go. If anybody wants to follow this topic, I have a Facebook in the world protesting hospital food called Ban Hospital Carcinogen Food, and I post every day good examples and bad examples. And there's so many bad examples, it's crazy.
You're incredible. Walk me through a patient's experience when they come to the Kahn Center to get help with their heart disease or cardiac issues. What is different between what a new patient will get that you have to deliver to them versus someone who's going to their average doctor who probably thinks they're about to get stents or, cholesterol lowering medication without talking about nutrition?
Right. 2 or 3 different things. One, they get me, not a PA, not a nurse practitioner. There's wonderful nurse practitioners, there's wonderful physician assistants, but the patients will want to see their doctor. Number 2, they get a lot of my time, and during that time, I know what they eat every breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, what time they start eating, what time they stop eating, what their exercise routine is, their sleep routine, their sexual function, their stress, their social support, their family structure, their exposure to toxins at home and at work, obviously smoking history, dental history, previous testing. Number 3, they're going to get advanced blood work beyond the average, which is usually insurance covered almost always. Number 4, they are probably going to get a test to actually determine if they have silent artery damage. There's 2 ways to do that. You can do an ultrasound of the neck, or you can do a CAT scan of the heart. And then they're going to go home with a book and a DVD, usually a copy of Forks Over Knives, usually a book. If it's a diabetic patient, it'll be Neil Barnard, Reversing Diabetes. If it's a heart patient, it might be my book, might be Dr. Esselstyn's book. If it's autoimmune, it might be Dr. Brooke Goldner's Goodbye Lupus. I have a whole library of books for them to take. And then when we come back, we'll review everything, but I'm going to quiz them about what they learned from Forks Over Knives or what they learned from reading a book. And I expect them to read it and put in the effort. It does the work. I don't need a dietitian on staff. I mean, with websites that are everywhere like Forks Over Knives, they can get the education with a little bit of effort.
Is there a typical or an average outcome in terms of, I guess we can just say success or failure or somewhere in between with your patients? Is there a common experience, or is it really different for everyone? Everyone's coming in with a different situation. And I know some people obviously don't follow probably exactly how you would like them to. But again, let's talk about the people who follow to a T your advice. Is there a common outcome, or is it different person to person?
I do believe it's a point of contention overall. Would everybody thrive on a whole food plant-based diet with bright, fresh, rainbow-colored foods? Are there actually anybody who has to eat meat to be in their best health and feel good? We don't know the answer to that question. There certainly are lots of testimonials that will say that's the case. There was that thing called the blood type diet that has largely been discredited. My experience is I see so many people that within 2 months have changed dramatically so many things about their life for the better by changing their diet to a whole food plant diet, that I think it does work for everybody. But I admit that, when we have more genomic data and ways to analyze people's microbiome, maybe we'll have a better way to refine it.
But I guess I'm just asking
jump in. So do I get everybody 100% plant-based? I don't. I'm always overwhelmed, though, how many actually have made the transition and are completely on board and show the benefits too.
I guess what I'm asking, just like a simple question, if someone comes into you with signs of heart disease, whether that's blockages in an artery or whatever other symptoms, if they follow to a T your lifestyle advice, how powerful and confident are you that with these lifestyle changes, someone can, like I'm saying, is it 80% of the time people can reverse their heart disease symptoms? Is it 70? Is it 93? Or is it kind of random and you don't know the data yet?
No, there's plenty of data to answer that question. And I know it's not 100%. I mean, I got to be authentic with people. I can't sell them on things.
Please.
I think it's in the range of 60 to 80%, which is a huge number. Think about how many prescriptions, operations, emergency rooms, 60 to 80%. Hospitals shrink. That's what hospital administrators are fearful of lifestyle medicine. Why does it? So it depends how broad. Lifestyle medicine is the nutrition plan we're talking about. Then you got to add in some fitness on a regular basis. Then you got to add in some focus on sleep management, stress management, social support, maybe sexual success, which is a good health marker. Then you got to add in the environment and its toxins and clean water and clean air and bisphenol A and parabens and triclosan and endocrine disrupting hormones. You got to kind of get smart about air quality and all that. Then you can, I think, push them a little further up the health hill with some supplements. Obviously, for the vegans, we're talking about B12 and vitamin D kind of supplements. For some of my heart patients, they need some others, coenzyme Q10 and such. So I think with that comprehensive program, it's more than 60%. But you find, I was with a patient this morning. She knows everything she needs to know about plant-based nutrition. Unfortunately, the paleo people got to her first, and she just won't give up 2 eggs in the morning, and her cholesterol won't come down, and there's a bit too much animal product. It's too hard. My husband doesn't support me. My friends don't do that. The country club doesn't have that. But whatever it is, and I'll be patient. And more they're seeing athletes and politicians, Cory Booker, and they're seeing medical people, and they're seeing influential Beyoncés, and it's creeping in. And one day the light bulb is going to go off, and they'll be on board. I probably got to shut it down in a minute or two, okay?
For sure, yeah. Just a couple more questions. Let's answer them quickly. What are the differences that you've seen, if there are any differences, between people smoking cigarettes versus cannabis, tobacco versus cannabis?
Yeah, I'd rather they vape cannabis and not smoke anything for their lung health and secondary smoke, and have something called tertiary smoking. We don't have legal recreational marijuana in Detroit, Michigan yet. We have medical marijuana. I participate in that. I write prescriptions. Half my patients are on CBD oil, which of course is not full cannabis. But so I'm a big supporter that there's a role there in general health, in heart health, in cancer health, in mental health. But I'd rather you vape it, and you just avoid some of the exposure to things that may actually do some damage to your lungs.
Cool.
Or edibles,
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's so many other options. I was just curious what you had to say about that. Okay, the last thing I'm going to ask you, kind of getting off only the nutritional topics, which we've been talking about a lot, and I think people are going to really enjoy this. And I've been trying to ask you difficult questions. I hope you appreciate this style of interview, just so you don't have to do the same things every time. I like to get out of my comfort zone and try to make it difficult for us to understand these things. But I really respect and admire about you is that you do so many different things. You're in the basement of your restaurant right now. You talk about sustainability. You talk about animal ethics. You obviously are a doctor and a scientist. You really are a full package. I was thinking the other day, take the China study, which was made famous, of course, through an animal study of being able to turn on and off cancer, essentially cancer growth within animals. One would argue that one study in the long run saved so many animals because it was one of the milestone products and resources for people to eat less animals and adopt a plant-based diet. But of course, in a world, we hope that we can get past animal testing and figure out scientific evidence in other ways. Do you see, and of course the China study is really old compared to modern science, decades older, do you see a place for animal studies in order to benefit the human and maybe even future animal population, or are we actually done and don't need any more animal studies in medical or scientific research?
I always want to recognize areas that I'm not expert on. I see increasingly a movement, and I honor particularly Dr. Neil Barnard at the Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine, and a scientist that works with him, Dr. Charu, who's in Windsor, Ontario, across from Detroit. She just opened at the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada, a center to teach new methods of doing research without using animals, using the cutting edge science, but being able to do it by computer simulation and CAD and chips and other ways, and artificial intelligence and deep learning, but not animals. And I don't know the answer to the question. Can every, so many animal models don't translate to human health anyways. There is one example, this Dr. Walter Longo, the 5 Pillars of Longevity, this fasting mimicking diet. Everybody should Google fasting mimicking diet, and a product that's plant-based in Los Angeles called Prolon. But he happened to hit a home run by studying yeast, studying small animals like mice, and found that the pathways of aging that animal proteins and amino acids turn on and cause aging happen to be the same pathways that are in humans. So that is an example where some animal research led directly to translate it into human treatment and human benefit. But going in the forward, we may not need to do that. We may be able to do that, all with computer-based learning and modeling. So I think the days, now for sure in medical schools, the days of mandatory dissections of dogs and such is just about over, thank God.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Kahn. Tell us lastly what people can get out of your book, Plant-Based Solutions. What can they learn in there, and what kind of resources will they learn about?
Yeah. Well, about half the book is education, half the book is recipes. Very simple, straightforward, healthy, whole food, no oil, plant-based recipes. My wife, my restaurant, I've gotten tremendously good feedback about them. 21-day eating plan with some bonus recipes, so there's almost 100. The beginning of the book, the first 150 pages, is really going through heart disease, cancer, adult diabetes, brain diseases, autoimmune, the environment, animal rights. Let's break it down so you can understand it and not spend 10 hours doing it. So it's bite-sized. It's not simplified to speak down to people, but how many people can read a 600-page book or 800-page book? I struggle with that. So I wanted people to really read this book, and within a couple days you're done, and then you got the recipes to play with, and it's making a good contribution. I think it's the first real plea for plant nutrition by a cardiologist and a university professor that's been written in a long time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everything. Really appreciate it. I think we definitely got a lot of information. Thank you again for getting into some of these more difficult and tough topics to talk about, but I respect and admire you so much. Thank you for all you do, and keep up the good fight. And I'll have all the links for you guys to connect or ask questions to Dr. Kahn if you want to go and hang out with him, be a patient at the medical center, or just see some books, Instagram posts, videos, and you have your own radio show as well, right?
A podcast, Heart Doc VIP. But yeah, be sure to wear your bike helmet.
Always. Are you kidding? I always wear a helmet. I talk all the time in my videos how stupid it is. I see bike travelers sometimes that bike without helmets. That's insane. I always wear a helmet.
Good. Thank you. Peace out.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Peace.
Bye-bye. Be well. Good luck.